Hi guys, this is Toan Nguyen. Thank you so much for taking the time and watching this very unique training video that's not available for everybody. And I wanted to record this video because I truly believe sometimes you have to watch things over and over and over to understand this. Now this is a very unique topic. Most people don't talk about this because they don't really understand the correlation between their own business and what the real world looks like. And some of you guys that own a business before understand this topic, business cycles. Many of you have never owned a business before, don't really understand it because no one's ever taught you about it. But in the real world, the word business cycles is very, very common. And of course, many of you that own a business understand what I'm talking about. So right now, I'm going to spend about 10 or 15 minutes going over business cycles, understanding basic macroeconomics and how the real world is. And second thing is how it relates with your own business. So let's get started. First question you're probably going to ask me is, what's a business cycle? Well, in the dictionary, the definition of a business cycle is basically the fluctuations in economic activity that an economy experiences over a period of time. A business cycle is basically defined in terms of periods of expansion and recessions. And many of you guys have actually seen these typical charts, right? Some of you guys know the time money chart when it goes from the bottom left to the upper right, and as time progresses, you start having, I guess, from the beginning when you're working your network marketing business, you're going to notice that you're going to spend a lot of time in your business, and you're going to earn very little money. Well, as time progresses, you're going to start noticing that at the end of, as an example, 5 years, you're going to start noticing that you're going to start earning more money and spend less time. Well, that's kind of an idea what a chart looks like, but that's a perfect world, okay? So it's really what a business cycle is a cycle, a full cycle of seeing an expansion of growth in revenue and a recession in revenue in a company or even in an economy. So let's go ahead and get right into the definitions of certain terminology, right? So there's 4 phases of a business cycle. Business cycles are identified as having 4 distinct phases: expansion, peak, contraction, and troughs. Troughs are the lowest turning point of a business cycle. Basically, when you've hit the rock bottom and the only thing left is it's going to go up. In other words, it's the end of recession. A peak is considered the highest value reached by some quantity in a time period. Basically, when the revenue is generated at its highest point that it can actually during that time period, and eventually it's going to start declining. Contraction is a period of economic decline or negative growth, basically when it's actually at a downturn, when it's going down. In other words, recession. And finally, expansion is what we all want. It's the active process of expansion when it's exploding, also known as the boom. Okay, so let's really talk about a cycle diagram of what a business cycle, a business cycle diagram, what it really looks like. So as you can see from this chart, you're going to see it go up and down, up and down. But what you also see is in the dark line, that the one that's going lower left to upper right, that's considered a growth trend. So in an idea of what a company wants is they want to see a chart going from the bottom left going to the right, going to the upper right. That's what an ideal company wants, right? They want to expand, they want to grow. So that's an ideal growth trend. But during that trend, you're going to see, as you can see the first dot on the left, a trough. That's when it's at its lowest point of a down economy in a company or in an economy. And as it starts going up in the blue, you're going to start seeing it expand. That's just when revenue is increasing, production is actually at an all-time high. And then you're going to see the second dot, which is a peak. And that's when it's at its max. And also known as a as at highest point, it's going to eventually go through contraction. So when it goes through contraction, that is when it's going through a recession. And as it goes forward, you're going to start seeing the same pattern over and over and over. It's a business cycle. It's all part of business. Every time there's a trough, there's going to follow by an expansion. After an expansion, you're going to hit a peak. Once it hits a peak, there's always contraction. There's always recession happening. But at the end of recession, you're going to hit a trough, and the trough will eventually go right into an expansion. That's why it's called a business cycle. It's going to go up and down, up and down. It's just part of business, okay? So having said being part of business, you're going to see an endless cycle, also known as an infinite cycle, where it peaks, there's contraction, troughs, expansion. After expansion, there's going to hit a peak, contraction, trough, eventually you go back to expansion. This whole thing is a complete cycle, right? In our deal world is we always want it to just skyrocket, go all the way up to the top, which is what ideally every company wants. But does that ever happen? It never happens. At some given point, a company will actually go through a contraction and a trough. But after every trough, there's always going to be an expansion. So it's a very, very normal thing in the real world. Okay. So let's kind of look at some examples, if you will, okay? Because a lot of times people don't really look at their own. So, I mean, here's the thing. Van and I, we get calls, and we have people go, my business is not doing too well. I've been in the business for 6 months, and I'm not having a whole lot of success. And I feel like I should quit. And the reality is people aren't looking at it from a far, long-term perspective. That's why one of our mentors, Jeff Olson, he says you gotta actually you gotta be here a year from now. You gotta see the long term. And honestly, a year from now is still too short. You know, a traditional company, the real world, they look at it from 10 years, 20 years, 25 years. They have that long term vision. And so when you look at it from a short term perspective, all you can see is negativity. All you can see is the decline, the recession that's going on, right? The contraction that's happening in your own personal business, but you never really see it hit trough. And once it troughs, you won't be around long enough to see the expansion happen again. Thus the business cycle. So let me kind of give you some examples of some companies that we've heard of before and we known of, and they are become very successful. So we all heard of Dell Computers. Right? Dell Computer is a successful company. It's a well-known brand. But if you look at their price, their ticker price was very, very low, focusing on a 1 year perspective. And what's interesting is that if you move forward and you look at a 25-year perspective, you can see right here that obviously in a 25-year span, the company exploded. But also I want you to notice that through the explosion, how many recessions were there? How many contractions were there? You know, if you can look at the valleys, right? The little zigzags in between, those are all the recessions that actually the company went through. And of course, there's an expansion again, and it hit a peak somewhere and it went down again. And so you got to look at it from a long-term perspective. In the real world, they look at it on a far long-term vision, and that's how they're able to actually, manage to be able to grow with the growth trend, because they have expectancy to be able to grow that high long term. Let's look at another company we've actually heard of before, right? Apple Computers. Now, if you look at it from a short perspective, this is a 1 week perspective. You can obviously see that if the company looked at it from a short-term perspective, the company's actually falling apart. I mean, honestly, let's close the doors. In a week, the company's falling apart. This company is totally not doing well. Let's just file bankruptcy, right? No, I mean, Apple Computer is not going to say that. They're not going to focus it from 1 week. But what do most people in the network marketing industry do? We focus on what happens that month before, right? If you had a bad month the month before, guess what the next month you're going to think? Man, my business is terrible. It's not doing well. It sucks. I want to quit. This business is not working out for me. I'm not good at this business. In the real world, we don't look at it from that perspective. We don't judge it from month to month. In the real world, they look at it from a business from year to year, 10 years to 20 years. And so what I'm trying to encourage you to do is, instead of looking at from, I have a brand partner distributorship, I want you to start looking at it from, I have a business. I run a multi-million-dollar or a multi-six-figure or a $1 million business. And if, as long as you start looking at your business like that, then you can start seeing the long term. Because Apple Computers, had you owned stock way back when, you've been able to ride that wave, right? 25 years later, you can see all the valleys in between, but you can see in the long term, 25 years, the company definitely grew. So your business right now, whether you've had a successful year or a bad year, you got to ask yourself, what is it going to look like 5 years from now? What is it going to look like 10 years from now? And if you can as long as you're good at what you're doing, and I'm pretty sure you are working on your craft and you're working on personal development, you're going to grow your business. So let's get more into a multi-level marketing business cycle. So I couldn't really find a chart online, but I had to draw it out. USANA is one of the top 10 largest nutritional companies in the world. And at one point, they started at zero. Just like your own personal business, it started at zero. And in the course of several years, the company got up to $100 million in sales. But then it dropped all the way down to 25 million a year later. Now, can you imagine that? To be able to own a company and go from $100 million and drop all the way down to 25 million? How would you feel? Discouraged? Feeling like you want to quit? Let's shut the doors, right? Well, a few years later, again, this is based on a 15 to 20 year business cycle. A few years later, the company jumped from 25 million back to 140 million, and then they dropped back down to 110 million. But today, the company is already closing over $600 million in sales. So if you look at it from a 15 to 20 year perspective, the company is definitely exploding. But if you looked at it from a year perspective or a 2 year perspective, the company's falling apart. Let's shut the door. Let's call it bankruptcy. Let's file Chapter 11, right? So the company is exploding right now within a 20-year cycle. Let's look at another company that some of you may have heard of before. So the next company we're going to look at is Herbalife. Now, Herbalife is definitely top 5 company in the network marketing industry. Okay. Now, at one point they were at zero, and they exploded into $400 million in sales. Now, a few years later, they dropped all the way down to $150 million, just like USANA. What would you think if this was your own business? Let's shut the door. Let's file bankruptcy, right? No, they didn't do that. They just went ahead and actually locked arms with their vision. They knew that this was going to be a huge company. They knew they had fantastic products. They buckled on, and they actually rode that wave and worked hard at it. And again, as long as you're good at what you do, you'll take it back up to the top. And a few years later, the company went from $150 million to $1.1 billion in sales with the capital B. Think about that, right? Can you imagine going from 400 million to 150 million and then $1.1 billion in sales? I mean, that's amazing, right? But then they drop back down to 950 million, right? So, I mean, some people, they think, oh, once I make it to $1.1 billion, I've arrived. No, you haven't. It's all part of business. And so you'll go back down here and there. But long term, you look at 20 years, the company did over $4 billion in sales in the last 1 or 2 years. I mean, what an incredible success story. And again, what does your own personal business look like? That's what I want you to really ask yourself, right? So this is really about perspective. Now let's look at a company that we all heard of before. Some people shy away from it, but regardless, the company has been a very successful company and a huge success story in this industry. Now, in the course of 25 years, because this is one of the oldest companies out in existence, in the course of 25 years, the company grew to $1.5 billion in sales. One of the first companies ever hit $1 billion in this industry. But actually, in a few years, the company fell by 33% and dropped only down to $1 billion, right? And so they thought they arrived. But once it went to $1 billion in sales, they said, you know what, don't worry about it. We had a bad, 1 or 2 years. Let's really focus on really building the company. And so they buckled in, they started driving this car in a course of 10 years, right? So think about it. It took 25 years to do 1.5 billion, but 10 years, within 10 years, they took the company not only back to 1.5 billion, but they flew across that and hit $7 billion in sales. And then 4 years later, they dropped back down to 4.5 billion. So can you imagine that? To go to skyrocket to 7 billion only to find yourself actually going back down to $4 billion in sales. I mean, should you shut your doors? Should you just say that you're out of business? No, they just cranked their business and they focused on their plans. And with that vision, they took the company right back up to 11 over billion, over 7 billion, and up to $11 billion in sales. This is called a business cycle. So look at all the contractions, look at all the expansion, look at all the booms and the busts that happened throughout this whole entire 25-year cycle. Over 25 years, sorry. This was actually in a course of over 30 years. But within 30 years, whoever actually stuck around became some of the most wealthiest people in the world. So, I mean, I literally had a mouthful, but you got to really start asking yourself this. How does this compare to you? Everything. See, your own 1099 brand partner sponsorship, even though you're a 1099, you're still an independent business owner. So you got to look at your business. I encourage you to start looking at your brand partnership as quote unquote a company. Whose company? My company. That's what you should say to yourself. My company. And one thing that Van and I we talked about is that if you take the amount of revenue that you generate a month in sales, whether you're a Lexus qualifier doing 12,500 or you're an executive director doing 37,500, you should take your revenue and multiply it by 12, which is in a course of a year, and that's what type of business you generate. Whether it's you generate over $150,000 a year, or $200,000 a year, or you're a national marketing director generating over $1 million a year, you got a successful business. Now your take home might be different. You might be taking home $500 a month. You might be taking home $2,000 a month. You might be taking home $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month. But in the real world, they don't talk about what your paycheck is. They talk about what revenue you generated. So start looking at your brand partnership as a company. Now, instead of looking at your 3 legs as quote unquote legs, start looking at them as business centers. People always say, man, I only have one stream of income. I only have 2 streams of income. No, you don't. If you actually have a 9 to 5 job, which is fine, it's great, and you have a Nerium part-time business, you got 3 legs of sponsorship. You have 4 income streams. You got 4 business centers. And so the more stronger you drive your business centers, the more stronger of a revenue you're going to generate for the companies, right? You got 3 business centers. This is all perspective. Now, look towards year to year and even more rather than week to week and month to month. So look towards year to year or even more rather than week to week, month to month. Like I said earlier, you want to focus not by the month. You had a great month. Don't go, man, I have a great business. No, that's short-term thinking. Don't think, man, I had the greatest month last month. I'm gonna have a more awesome month this month. You're not setting your expectations up right. You're literally setting your expectations up to fail. What you gotta see it is, I had a great month. Let's keep building towards the year. What is the revenue that you want to generate for the year? What is the revenue you want to generate 5 years? What do you want it to look like 5 years from now? In that way, whether you have a good month or a bad month, you're not basing your business and your excitement on the month before, on the week before. You're basing it on long term. And that is going to really keep you in the game, but it's also going to strengthen you in the game. All right. So, business cycles of emotions. Now, we've talked about how the cycles work. We looked at it from a perspective of revenue, but also economists have already talked about your emotions. See, every time you're going through this, you're going to actually go through what's called the entrepreneurial emotional roller coaster. Okay. So, in the beginning, when you start, you're going to go through optimism. You're excited, you're pumped up. Oh man, I'm so excited. I can't wait to get this going. You start focusing on your business, you have excitement, you get this thrill. You notice the little cloud, right? Wow, I feel great about this possibility. You start, sharing the business, start showing the videos to people, and someone joins, right? You get the sense of euphoria. This is the point of maximum creation. This is basically the bust, right? This is when things start just explode, and eventually, once something bust, once something hits peak, guess what it goes? It goes through contraction. So through the contraction, when people start quitting, or people start, they don't fast start qualify, they don't get promoted. Well, you're gonna start getting some anxiety, cynicism, judgment, fear starts creeping in, and it kills your dreams. It heightens self-awareness. Heightening self-awareness is your best insurance policy. So you got to be aware of these things, right? So you got to start realizing, wait, I'm going through my anxiety right now. And then eventually you go through denial, fear, desperation. This is when you start thinking, you know what, Nerium's not really working right now. You start panicking. Oh my gosh, maybe I should quit, or I need to look for other things. And you start really not focusing on your business. And eventually you get to a point of despondency and depression. But what's interesting is once you hit rock bottom, and as long as you have self awareness, and you're good at what you do and you can take it back and you focus, you'll start feeling hopeful. You start feeling relief because you're starting to get some results. And then once your results starts kicking in, optimism. Then the cycle repeats itself. Optimism, excitement, thrill, euphoria. Again, the cycle repeats itself. These feelings are natural. You got to learn to recognize and interrupt the patterns that kill creativity. So the dream room develops your competency for being powerful and peaceful in the face of uncertainty. So you really have to be aware of your emotions, and once you're aware, you can make a choice to how you want to respond to that. You can either react or you can respond. And if you respond correctly, you can create change in your life and in your business. So as we wrap things up, I want to really just kind of end it with this. Your perspective is everything. And so even though your plan is to get to the finish line with no hiccups, the reality is that you are going to go through a heap of problems. Okay? And your plan in your mind are completely different than what really is reality. And as long as you change that perspective and start looking at it from the real world, of how the real world looks at business and how you should look at your business, you are going to be successful in anything you do. So hopefully this helps. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you guys watching this. Please share it with anybody that you believe that can benefit from this. And I look forward to seeing you guys at the next event. Take care, everybody. God bless.